my duty to first introduce myself. So for those who don't know me, I'm Fiona Radshead. I chair the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition and work with my colleague Keith Moore and Sam Holmes. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all. We've put together what is an action-packed agenda today, covering a really broad range of subjects. So we're really looking forward to exploring all of that with you. Our aim is always to give you a flavour of what we're doing, but also what key partners are doing, and also give you an understanding of what's going on in the broader range of sustainability. So I think I will therefore remind you all that under the terms of how we operate as a collaboration, this is a pre-competitive meeting. So, we take things like antitrust and making sure that we don't break any competition rules very seriously. But that said, we also welcome very open and honest discussions, which we always have as well. So great to see everybody. And I think we're slightly ahead of time, but Courtney, I know you've got a hard stop. So given that quite a few people have already joined us, perhaps you could start. It's a great pleasure to introduce Courtney. Courtney's been a fantastic friend of the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition. We've had lots of fantastic conversations, and she's doing some marvellous work with the colleagues in the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and Jose, who's already joined us online. So morning, Jose, as well. I'll be hearing from you soon. And Courtney Soulsby is the Global Director of Healthcare and Life Sciences sector at the British Standards Institute, BSI, and many of you will know her far-reaching work and the fantastic impact she's having. So Courtney, I'm going to hand over to you, and we really look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and honored to be here, part of your well-established and well-diverse group that you've assembled under SHC for so many years now. So I'm going to take the next 15-20 minutes to go through a presentation that we've assembled to talk about ecosystem consensus across the healthcare and life sciences sector around environmental sustainability standards and also certification. So bear with, hopefully you can see the screen okay now, and I will be working between the two screens, so bear with me if I flick my eyes back and forth between them. So first I'm going to start about talking briefly around the pharmaceutical life cycle and some of the environmental considerations that we all face when quantifying environmental impact across that life cycle. So a very simplified life cycle of medicine here on the screen to just showcase that ultimately the challenge manufacturers have is to be able to quantify what the environmental footprint is across that life cycle of the medicine in different product categories. So small molecules, biologics, and then also all of the different environmental considerations or categories. Many manufacturers are focusing on greenhouse gas emissions as a priority, but there are other topics that are being really faced by manufacturers. And what are the trade-offs between some of these environmental considerations? If you reduce emissions, how does that increase your waste? If you are looking at land use, how is that also as a trade-off with emissions? So all these different environmental considerations really showcase the need to take an overarching multi-impact consideration when measuring environmental impact across the pharmaceutical product life cycle. And I bring that up because what we're going to talk through today is two initiatives that we have been leading through multiple stakeholder collaborations for environmental impact and footprint of medicines, and also looking at pharmaceuticals in the environment, specifically within the antibiotic portfolio. So I'm going to start with looking at antimicrobial resistance at a very high level. We as the pharmaceutical industry and also we as the healthcare systems have a challenge of understanding where pharmaceuticals are in the environment, and the threat of antimicrobial resistance has really shone a spotlight on the antibiotic portfolio in this arena. So there have been many industry fora looking at this topic of environmental waste discharge through the AMR Industry Alliance, PSCI, the PI task force in Europe. But ultimately, the drivers for mandatory control of waste discharge, especially for antibiotics, has become more widespread. So as a result of that, back in 2022, there was an industry standard that BSI facilitated the development of, working with the AMR Industry Alliance, to essentially set those thresholds for calculating the PEC and arriving at the PNEC, the predicted no effect concentration, to be able to understand what is a safe concentration of antibiotic waste discharge into the surrounding aquatic environment. As a result of that industry standard being produced, there is then launched a certification where there's an independent assessment done of antibiotic manufacturers now to actually certify that they have that safe concentration being discharged from their manufacturing processes. So this standard and certification are now referenced in a number of different programs of work in the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, or PSCI. It's now incorporated in the latest version of the self-assessment questionnaire and the PSCI principles. And also there's a number of different license holders that are actually driving this certification through their supply chains. A letter from the AMR Industry Alliance driving suppliers to adopt certification to the standard. GSK has actually set a sustainability target now formally to certify all of their antibiotic products to this standard by 2026 for all of their owned manufacturing sites, and are also driving it through their supply chain. So just like they're setting greenhouse gas emissions targets, they're also setting targets for their antibiotics as well. Also, in addition to manufacturers driving this initiative, we also have a number of different healthcare systems that are now requiring this certification. So I think there are 7 different countries. On the left-hand side, you will see is the Nordics countries have aligned on their antibiotic manufacturing requirements to actually the highest score being attributed to those who have gotten independent certification to the antibiotic manufacturing standard, which I think Maya is going to talk about later on, I believe, in this meeting. But we also now have NHS England's subscription model for antimicrobials. This is a mandatory requirement there for bringing on, but also we have Finland, Denmark, the Netherlands, and an NGO called GARD-P really active in gaining access for the antibiotics. So this is a touch on how this can evolve of setting industry standard and agreeing on independent validation to that standard. Through this initiative, we've engaged there's over now about 60 products certified, represented from 14 different countries. So that's really a wide, you take an ecosystem-wide approach, what progress can be made across a specific product category. That initiative has led to a number of different stakeholders being engaged on topics of environmental sustainability and how we can really align on an ecosystem-wide approach to agreeing on what is the right standard to set. So we have healthcare systems, members of the departments of health and governments, NGO and aid organizations looking at low and middle income countries, trade associations, regulators, manufacturers, other standards bodies, supranational organizations, and also academia, all engaged on how do we better set standards for the life sciences and healthcare industry for making sustainable progress. So one of the standards, which I know esteemed colleague of mine, Jose, will be touching on in a subsequent presentation as well, is the standard related to life cycle assessments for medicines. So we have engaged a number of different stakeholders, as referenced in the previous slide, most notably the Sustainable Markets Initiative, who has set up the Pharma LCA Consortium, who has really led the development of this program of work. We've also got sponsorship from the UK Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England to essentially drive a consensus-based standard for setting product category rules for doing life cycle assessments of medicines. We have an independent technical author and a steering group of 15 stakeholders, which I'll touch on in a moment, to help drive the development of this standard. So the real objective of this standard is to create a unified method or methodology. Right now, a number of different manufacturers are doing life cycle assessments to different standards, using different consultancies. The idea here is we have a unified mechanism to actually calculate environmental impact of medicines using LCA as the approach, with clear product category rules. Multiple environmental impact areas are considered here, and also the idea is to have global impact and harmonization of methodology, with the idea of enabling sustainable manufacturing processes, facilitating greener procurement decisions, allowing efficiency in the supply chain, and again, a wider industry improvement. This standard is very much a specification standard, so it is a set of rules that are to be complied with. So it's based on the international standards for life cycle analysis. It does take into account not just carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, but multiple environmental impact areas. It very much has an understanding of where proxies for data gathering and specification for specific rules for data gathering. It is intended to be used by multiple stakeholders across the healthcare ecosystem, from manufacturers and their suppliers to healthcare providers and professionals, procurement representatives, policymakers and regulators, in addition to academics. So where we are with the standards development exercise is it's really started back in September 24, where a draft has been sent over to the technical author as draft 0, where we agreed the scope through a consensus building process, had initial stakeholder engagement, and have gone through multiple drafts now with facilitation through the steering group. We are in this green box on the top right-hand corner. We're in draft 3. After a follow-up steering group meeting happening last month. We're gearing up for the public consultation process, which is the wider consultation happening in May, with the intent ultimately of publishing the PAS before COP this year in October. One question we get often is the composition of the steering group. So the steering group is very much a global steering group representing 8 different countries and also multiple stakeholders. So we have representation from the generics industry, we have representation from the multiple healthcare systems, consultancies, aid organizations, innovative manufacturers, and also NGOs and aid organizations as well. So and academics and consultancies. So I think the idea is that if we are really driving consensus through this process, and let me let you know, there has been some very intense debates in this consensus building process. It has not been straightforward and streamlined. It very much has been lots of good, healthy tension happening through this process to really drive consensus. And I know SHC has been integral in developing consensus on a number of other processes and understands the healthy tension that can happen in these debates. So it is very much trying to drive off of the collaboration and consensus building. Every member voice carries equal weight. And again, organizations can and have been internally circulating drafts for consensus there. If the other part of consensus that we've had is we've had multiple discussion forums through a digital community hub. So this digital community hub now has 300 participants representing 27 different countries from across the globe. You can see the geographic regional distribution in this table here. So it's not just a UK-centric approach or an EU-centric approach. It very much is a global draft that we're working on here, again, representing multiple different stakeholder groups. You can join this digital hub by scanning this QR code, a little quick shameless plug if I can, Fiona, just to drive really ultimately awareness of the public consultation process coming up in May. So these are the next steps, very much is the public consultation process. By clicking on that QR code previously, which I'll go back to in just a moment, you're going to be able to get information on how to register for the public consultation, which is the critical stage for everyone to include their voice. And the idea here is that, again, the public consultation will lead to a final steering group to review those comments that we get in the consultation process and create a final draft ready for publication in October. So I'll go back to this slide for one more moment. And thanks again for SHC for bringing us and giving us an opportunity. I think you're going to hear more about this initiative from Jose and the wider initiatives being led by the Sustainable Markets Initiative subsequently, but hopefully gives a view of the different standards and independent assessments being done related to sustainable manufacturing of pharmaceutical products.
Thanks very much, Courtney. That's fantastic. And I think what you're demonstrating, particularly through your work on the antimicrobial resistance, is just how having these standards really drive better decision making, have all sorts of system impacts that you can only begin to imagine when you start the process. I know we've got one question from Claire, please, Claire.
No, sorry, it was in error. I was going to clap. Presentation.
Good stuff. So Courtney, one question from me. I mean, we know how difficult this process is. What's the biggest challenge, do you think, from the collaboration from your point of view?
Yeah, probably been two major takeaways. There is one, the healthy tension of what is being asked in public procurement tenders of manufacturers and the need to make sure healthcare systems are involved with manufacturers in setting of those programs of work and tender requirements. And I think if what we've been able to do here is take away the usage, as in what are those requirements of the public procurement tender requirements, and instead focus on actual sustainable progress. And I think that's really what's happened here is the discussion has gotten away from kind of customer and supplier relationships, but really talking about the methodology, which has honestly been a real challenge, is separating the usage and application of the standard and really focusing on the technical set of requirements. So that was one major challenge. And then I think the second would probably be the acknowledgement of two different sets of manufacturers, of innovative manufacturers and also generic manufacturers, and the challenges that both of those parts of the industry face when gathering information from their supply chain and getting information ready for declaring through public forums. So I think the recognition of the level of availability of information and the ability to, again, then report or declare that information publicly has different availability by part of the manufacturing subsector.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing quite like getting into the detail to really move things on. As somebody said in a meeting I was in yesterday, the why is quite very easy, the what is pretty easy, but the how is the really tricky bit. And, you know, congratulations on your leading on the how. We've got a couple of questions. Actually, one is, how are you engaging with the WHO ATTACH programme? Have you had any chats with them? Because we know they're interested in standards.
Yeah, definitely. So we're honored to be incorporated into their expert consultation group in October that they formed with WHO ATTACH on climate change and sustainable healthcare systems. So we were engaged there, and then also are engaged subsequently in their task force creation. So one of the objectives they have is around national procurement standard alignment. And so we're in early phase discussions there about how some of the assembly of the 300 plus stakeholders across 27 countries can help really achieve some of the WHO ATTACH objectives there. So very much engaged and also working through this new structure they have set up as of January this year related to task force.
That's really good to hear. And Kelly had a question about, you know, you've done a lot on AMR. What other risks from pharmaceutical compounds are you looking to look at, and thoughts about the challenges of mitigating risks of them?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And so I think what the Pollution Hub is doing, the Pharma Pollution Hub is doing under Kelly's leadership is fantastic, trying to understand, again, this multi-stakeholder alignment and approach to tackling pharmaceutical pollution. I think the challenge that we have realized, even with antibiotics, is that even certain antimicrobials don't yet have an agreed PNEC, predicted no effect concentration. And I think with the broader pharmaceuticals and the environment topic, that's one of the challenges, is that not every product platform or product category has an agreed upon what is this, safe concentration for the environmental discharge or the environmental PNEC. Nevertheless, if there are any impacts on public health or aquatic health. So I think one of the challenges we have is there an ability to set up an independent scientific panel to ultimately establish those PNECs to allow for standardization to happen across wider product platforms or categories in the pharmaceutical area. I know Kelly and I are talking and brainstorming to see how we could potentially.
That sounds great. And Marianne was asking the $1 million question about, will the standard be applied for the 2028 milestone, and how about medical devices?
Thanks, Marianne, for a tough question, as always. I think, again, just to reiterate the point, is the challenge we've had is to try to separate the usage of the standard from the technical development, because I think ultimately usage of the standard is out of the scope of the development. I do know NHS England has been vocal that they have used this information to help inform what their 2028 milestone will look like, but are not yet open, and they will go through a consultation period once they have devised that 2028 milestone. I think what everyone in this process has vocalized is that they have learned a lot about the realities of carrying out product level life cycle assessments and the challenges with which that creates. So I think I won't be able to say yes or no to that question, Marianne, unfortunately, but ultimately just say that I know there have been a lot of learnings.
Great. And then, Julia, there's no such thing as a silly question, but is this focused only on API manufacturers, or are other in the supply chain, for example, companies, or others in the supply chain, for example, companies who compound and formulate antibiotics for use in IVs, also covered?
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, the standard and certification apply not only to API stage of manufacturing, but also finished drug formulation. So we're actually issuing certificates stages of production. So it's actually kind of a three-part relationship of the product, the site with which it's manufactured, and the stage of production, either API or drug product stage. So it's those three things that correlate ultimately to a certificate. So you'll see an amoxicillin API India certificate, India manufacturing site A certificate, and then you'll also see an amoxicillin drug product, Switzerland manufacturing site certificate, for example. So it is applicable to both stages of production.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. This whole session's on how we can make decisions, metrics for decision making, and you're doing a fantastic job in supporting that. So thank you for coming to talk to us. We know how busy you are, but really appreciate it. I think we've got one final question from Amy Newton before you go.
Sorry, no, I was trying to clap as well. It's the theme of today.
Good. Well, you've got lots
Thanks very much,
there.
Fiona.
Thank you so much, Courtney. See you
Thanks,
soon.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So our next speaker has been really in the thick of this, and I think, Jose, if I'm thinking about the question being really tricky and difficult, you've been right at the centre of the how and been doing some fantastic work with the Sustainable Markets Initiative and beyond. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Jose Carrera, who is the Global Head of Environment and Environmental Sustainability at Sanofi, but has been playing a leading role in the SMI work you just heard mentioned. So you're going to tell us about the LCA and product category rule development that you've been leading. So look forward to hearing about that. Jose, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you so much for having me here. So I'm going to share presentation. So as Fiona says, so I'm a global head of environment sustainability in Sanofi, but I've been the pleasure to be leading the Pharma LCA consortium in the last 2 years. It's been a wonderful journey, not yet finalized, with all of these ups and downs that every project that can address during the duration of that. But there's been really a great demonstration of collaboration. So that's happened actually a time ago, even before the SMI, the Sustainability Market Initiative that you know very well, because probably Fiona has been discussing with you many times, and based on the presence of the strong participation for the Sustainability Health Coalition and SMI. So that is starting that journey even before SMI happened. That was starting a technical discussion within the Pharmaceutical Environmental Group that you can see here. The PEC is a group of 18 pharmaceutical companies where we discuss about and the way that we can collaborate together to improve and to accelerate the practices on environmental sustainability and environmental compliance practices, traditional practices in the past. And this is a topic that we discussed years ago to say, okay, we are now starting to conduct life cycle analysis, product life cycle analysis. We know there are some standard reference, but the translation into the pharmaceutical products are not so obvious, mean that we need to make assumptions, we need to make decisions in terms of interpretation. And at the end, we realized that no one was using the same methodology to conduct this pharmaceutical LCA product. The consequence of that is that, okay, nothing internally, because, and I will go through that later on, the final aim of the LCA is to helping companies to identify the hotspots and to make the right decision, because it's a very scientific approach. And I always say the first approach, because you are considering multiple environmental indicators. But when you are moving to the externally communication, then this is something that we cannot do that without any consensus standard. And we have seen that in the past, or more recently, sorry, we are receiving increasing requests and demand from different stakeholders, a patient association, hospital, but national system as well, health systems, in order to get much more information, product-based information from and that was a limitation that we recognize. So that journey is starting with this technical discussion in the past, and SMI came across actually with a great opportunity, of having our CEOs leading leadership, opportunity really to include that in the CEO agenda in SMI, to launch this task force to create that we call the PCR, the product category rule, which is base actually to create this standard. So based on that consensus and based on the leadership of the SMI and with the support of Pharmaceutical Environmental Group, we decided to create a consortium, a formal consortium, where it was a very interesting journey, now formed with 11 companies, aiming to create and to share this technical expertise, additional also some financial funding to create this standard. The discussion also went beyond this, the limitation of moving to the standard. Why? Because having the standard is the first step. It's great. There is the set of rules, the same language that all the companies they may use, then to create this LCA, then enabling us to be able to communicate. But there is not enough. We recognize as well that the interpretation of a standard or the PCR, the product category rules, even can sometimes be difficult for small companies, for companies that are not had the expertise on that point. So we decided as well to put in, as a part of the scope, to work on the digitization as you have been done now as well with the patient care pathway. So we consider as well as a part of the work stream. Number 3, to try to aiming to develop a digital tool that facilitate the process of application of the standard. We recognize as well that data is basic. So we have the standard, we have the method, but we need data as well. And data is not only about primary data, it's also about having data sets that can be used. And we have seen a huge gap as well, a big gap in terms of data set for pharmaceutical specific inventory products. So we decided as well to develop a stream that is aiming to fit and to create this secondary data, or this inventory data for a pharmaceutical product. And the final one, the work stream number 4, was about the stakeholder engagement. So before even engaging with the British Standard Institute, which has been key, been essential to us to develop broader this stakeholder engagement, we already started as well to work with the SMI stakeholder engagement group to involve not only beyond the pharmaceutical industry, to involve other groups on this journey. So that was a wonderful journey starting in June 2023. We are aiming to finalize, to close this process and let these initial ambitions by end of this year, with key milestone of publishing the standard, but not only, but also including the development of some data set and also the development of some digital solution for that. So that was a bit of just showing the planning, the initial planning, that has not been even respecting in some of the cases, because the tool was even more complex than expected, and the tool has been even a bit delayed to the next to this year, even probably to the following one. So you can see as well the group of pharma that is forming this consortium, and the strong partnership that we develop as well with the NHS and Office for Life Science in collaboration to or in co-sponsoring the standard that Courtney has been discussing with you before. So I want just to give you insight. I mean, most of you probably are already familiar with the LCA, but just for those that maybe are less familiar, I wanted to give you some head-ups about what does it mean in LCA. So a product environmental life cycle analysis, as I say, is a method, it's a standard method that can help us to get the environmental footprint using different environmental indicators, not only carbon, that is an important topic. So we are managing around 16 environmental indicators, and it's enabling us to go through all of these stages, including starting with the raw material sourcing and finalizing with the end of life. So we have a cradle to grave approach, meaning that there is a system or a process that led us the end to have a comprehensive understanding about your hot spots in terms of these different system environmental indicators, but also in terms of different stages. There's a process that when you start to conduct different LCAs, you can see some similarities moving to one LCA to another one, when the products are similar in terms of hotspot, but also you get additional surprise or additional information when you are changing some of the product that you are doing the LCA. So you cannot, now we have information, detailed information about the confirmation that not always the hotspots are the same for the biologics, for APIs, for when you are even including or vaccines, or you are including some devices. So packaging it can have a different impact depending on the product. The API, of course, usually is one of the drug substance is usually one of the hotspots, but not always with the same weight. Sometimes climate change, of course, but sometimes you need to look off as well for the water usage, and this is a kind of knowledge that we start to develop as well, that helping as well to anticipate hotspots even before conducting an LCA. So LCA, in that way, is a beautiful approach to help identify the hotspots and also to anticipate potential hotspots for new development. Point as well on data, and that was an important topic as well, where I say that primary data is, of course, is the ideal, is the more precise data, that the more precise source of data when you are going to conduct an LCA, but we recognize that it's not possible always to have this primary data, and especially when you are talking about supplier data. It's a point that now we are working with PSCI as well, with the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, to engage more and to develop and capacity building for our suppliers in the future, to help us, because we can see that supplier has a key role in the LCA as well by providing this primary data. So we also recognize that we need life cycle inventory data sets. Some of them are public already, are some cross-functional, some of them are starting to fit with some pharmaceutical products, but we recognize, as I said before, that there is a big gap as well. So we are collaborating, we are launching a partnership with a strong recognized partner, aiming to increase the number of life cycle inventory specific pharmaceutical products. And at the end, we have assumption, and it's also the way why PSCR is important, having this kind of set of essential assumptions or critical assumptions, sorry, that we have consensus why conducting LCA, that we can ensure that in these rules, conducting LCA, that we are going to use these assumptions. So this is well regulated by the PSCR and then by the standard that we are creating today. So actually, I should have been starting with that one, but in the flow of the presentation now is that why we are doing that, and some of them, some of these points already been introduced to you. So first as well is that in terms of regulatory compliance, so of course LCA is supported by a standard, by the ISO standard. And also we know that we understand, and that's been one of the questions about the use, potential use. So we are not intending to determine the use. We are not intending to tell to others, how they need to use this standard. Our intention is to have this standard to be used by the stakeholder in the future. But we already know that some national system, and NHS is one example, but also we have French authorities more recently as well setting up in the score, a current score for potential tenders. Though we understand that there is a potential use for national systems for customer to request environmental footprint, environmental broad data based on the use of this standard. For me, this is the primary one. And what I say before is that first, an LCA is providing to LCA users the opportunity to identify the hotspots, and then when you identify your hotspot, of course, to put actions, and after to quantify and to measure the impact of these actions to finally reduce the environmental impact of your products. And also it's cost-effective innovation, because that allows you to anticipate, as I say before, during the product development, is an easier way to anticipate, to minimize the environmental impact when the product is into the market. We know all the difficulties that we have to introduce any minor change because of regulator market authorization review. It's cost effective as well in that standpoint, that be preventive is always better than be reactive, but also it's needed as well to identify environmental action that also is contributing to reduce cost. I mean, every time that you, of course, are improving yield, you are reducing the use of materials, you are reducing waste, that would be a positive financial impact as well caused by this environmental action. So a bit of progress where we are today on these work streams. I think Courtney has been already largely discussing and sharing with you that we are now in the last draft version and we are close to a public consultation. And I encourage you to participate to this public consultation as well. That will be open, I think, in the coming days and coming weeks. And that will be last for the couple of months till we finally have the opportunity to release this standard, hopefully by October, November this year. For the product environmental data, we have signed already a contract with EcoInvent to launch a first set of products. A product that has been identified as a common product for the pharmaceutical sector. And this data generated would be available in the EcoInvent dataset. So it's not something that we are creating only for the steering committee for the LCA consortium. That would be available through EcoInvent, as well as standard would be public available. That would be free of charge. That would be public available. That was part of the agreement with the BSCI. There is not any commercial operation behind. It's not something just to create it for the LCA consortium. So the LCA consortium has been supporting because of the SMI leadership and also because of the expertise that this group of pharma is having to be leveraged. But everything that is being created will be and that would be open source. So the development of the tool now is under discussion because it's been a tricky one. Has been the most difficult one. So we are now in the scoping phase of this process. Probably that tool would be something in between an universal or LCA tool like you can have go to the market and only having the standard. What I mean is that we are trying to cover a gap between these two elements, the standard CIMA Pro, for instance, which is a recognized LCA software, and developing something which is more simple, helping to small companies, helping to other companies as well to start a journey of LCA. This is under discussion now. It's not yet validated. This is something that we are having a bit of need of rush now in terms of the decision because the time is moving fast, and we have seen the timelines for the consortium are now short when we see 2025 end of the year being around the corner. So we are now to make decisions quickly on that. We still believe that we need something as has been done now for patient care pathway of Fiona, something that could be inspiring us in that regard. And the following one is the stakeholder engagement, keeping from both from SMI but also with the British Standard Institute, the QBT Hub that has been said with you as well by Courtney, that you are kindly invited for those that have not yet been part. It's a place where more than 300 stakeholders now are being, and where the public consultation from the standard will happen, what I say, starting in the coming days and weeks. I think I've already been discussing on this stakeholder engagement strategy, what has been very much reinforced by British Standard Institute, NHS, with the PASS standard. You need more information. We are continually updating in the PEC PharmaLCA Consortium hub. There is also a newsletter that you can subscribe. Already been discussing about this partnership with NHS and BSAI. And this last reminder as well, it's not about the webinar because the webinar is off. So dismiss the screenshot, but it's a reminder that now you join the hub, the BSAI hub, that is here the link, and you have seen the code as well by Courtney. You will also have the opportunity now to participate to the public consultation if you want. And with that, I think I'm starting talking. I'm open to any question that you may have.
Thanks very much, Jose, and also having seen you lead the journey with others, it's not been easy at times, so congratulations, because I think your persistence and patience is definitely paying off. We have a couple of questions, one of which you've sort of covered already, but I'll start with the first one. When you have a big portfolio, how do you sort products in order to apply to look for the hotspot based on their API, their therapeutical use, ?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question, and this is part of the internal know-how. I'm open to say what is experience, but only have our own experience. I don't know if this is the common experience. So the first thing, that the more LC that you do, the more able, or the more capable you are to make these kind of shortcuts and to make these decisions. So I think it's not, unless from LCA perspective, it's not in our case not about the therapeutical area. It's more about really the composition, the technology of the API. So I mean, we say you can start to make these big groups, biologics, and after APIs or small molecules, and you are talking about biologics, definitive vaccines, and maybe a specific products. And after those codes, you need to consider as well the administration dose, if it is liquid, if it is injectables, and all these things. So when you're starting to see about, the impact of the drug substance versus the formulation, the origin of the API, there is a biological, there is a small molecule, and after also in the small molecule, which kind of, there is a long process synthesis versus a small or short steps. So this is kind of expertise and knowledge that you can develop internally, and that's the way that's helping you to anticipate the hotspot. It doesn't mean that you don't need to do, even for a large portfolio, to conduct finally an LCA for all these for this product. But when you have make the first inventory for one product. You have map, and especially you have a software, you have something that helping you after replication is easier because you have the first initial work already done, the mapping, the step, the assumptions, the decisions, the source of the primary data. This is what is taking a long time as well, the access to make a lot of decisions. Once you have map, you have the decision made, the source of data, small changes in the portfolio. A portfolio mean a group of a group of drugs or a group of medicines that having the same profile, that will be very fast and very quickly to conduct that. And this is because the idea behind having the software, having a digital solution behind is something that is very helpful because that lets you also to automatize. One of the things that also we have seen as well, the Gen AI, that is a great potential that is still under exploration, but there is huge potential of AI and Gen AI to accelerate as well having the opportunity to accelerate the process of conducting LCA. When you have strong foundational elements for expansion for similar products.
Great. Thank you very much, Jose. There's a question I think you partially touched on in your presentation anyway, but Jennifer was asking, what is the advantage of developing a separate tool instead of using CIMAPRO and specialized emission factors and characterization factors?
Yeah, I mean, so the point is that, I mean, there is not any advantages, so or disadvantage, or you have a lot in one side or another one. So I think it's part of the strategy that you want to define. So, I mean, we can share with in Sanofi, especially I think that we shared many times and we are presenting to many of you. We decided years ago to develop our own internal tool. Why? Because we had the ambition to as much as we can to socialize or to make the tool accessible to as much people as possible. What I mean that CIMAPRO is an expert tool. So it is something that can be used by an expert. This is fine. It's performing well. You can do that. The opportunity to develop something what is more accessible to people that are a part of the LCA process, R&D, practitioner, project leaders, packaging designers, is helping us as well to make this extensive to other areas, to other departments, meaning that LCA can be a way as well to really eco-design at the earliest stages. If we having just a single person conducting LCA through CIMAPRO is a bottleneck, and after it can be a reactive approach. So that was the advantage that we saw in Sanofi. That's the right strategy for everyone. And this is because we are aiming to do something that is more digital and accessible. We try to have the same approach for the consumption, but I think it's been difficult because we have seen different strategies in different companies. What means that at the end there was not room really to have to create this opportunity. So now the idea to create something simple, visual, between CIMAPRO and the standard, for instance, is helping this transition. Meaning that for those that are already familiar probably with this commercial tool, no need to go there. So it's something that we are intending to facilitate the process to promote the engagement and the addition to the standard, to help maybe others that having less expertise before moving to that tool.
Great. And then we had one final question, which is really focusing, as you described, from cradle to grave and about post-consumption and how your approach is going to capture pharmaceutical pollution in the post-consumption phase. Kelly was interested. Are you going to be looking at that?
I mean, this is a good one. If I understand well, Kelly, is you are talking about the use of our medicines, the pharmaceutical in the environment part, the use phase. That's correct, Kelly?
Yep, I think that's what she's asking.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the good one. So we consider the PSCR is a continuous process. Actually, we need to go and review, I think, every 2 or 3 years. That was the first discussion, the hot discussion that we have in the LCA consortium months ago about our responsibility about providing really a clear and scientific approach in the LCA to measure, to quantify the effects, the impact of our medicines in the use phase. So now we recognize the limitation about having a scientific, simple approach to be integrated in the LCA. So the first version of the LCA, there could be having some limitation in that point. There could be, of course, ecotoxicity assessment, but we're intending to keeping working on that to be more precise in the topic. So what we say that LCA is in the end of a state in years ago, probably the perfect and the unique solution because everything will be included. Today, that will not be the case. So LCA, that will be a complement, that will need some complementary information or assessment to assess this kind of thing. So maybe that we still need, of course, PEC ratios and all of these elements that we do to quantify or estimate the environmental impact of our medicines. That we still need to do, like a circular economy, for instance, is another I'm not say weakness, but another thing that we need to have in addition to the LCA circularity index to that. So we recognize that there will be some limitation in the first version. One of them could be maybe that one. It could be addressed. We recognize there is an important one, and you will see that there could be a document to say that we engage to keeping working on that. How do we integrate it LCA? We know that now we can do off-site. We can, and we are seeing the standard from the AMR as an example, but we know that how to measure the impact of our medicines in the use phase, but it's not something that will be fully integrated today in the LCA in the first version.
Great. Thank you very much, Jose, and thank you for answering all those questions from all your work. Thank you so much. Certainly in this session, thank you. It was all about thinking about how we measure and design things. We first heard about from Courtney around standards, and now we heard about the really tricky bit of how you translate it into an LCA and product category rule. And we've been doing some work with Rachel Carson and colleagues on taking that to the next level of decision making. And Rachel Carson is the Director of Global Sustainability Policy and Advocacy at GSK, and she's going to be telling us about the paper that we've recently published as a group on evaluating the environmental impact of health technology. And there is a forthcoming seminar on the 7th of May next week as well, where you'll be able to hear more detail, but Rachel's going to give us a taster. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. It says that it's loading my presentation. Is it there?
It's appeared. You've got it.
Excellent. Yeah, so as Fiona said, there'll be a session on the 7th of May to get into this in more detail. So I'd recommend everyone to sign up to that. So this paper was published in February through the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition. And just to say, it was really led by a number of companies, but Novo Nordisk really took a lead on this. And you can see then the other list here. So Sanofi, Roche, Bupa. And really kudos to the Health Policy Partnership, to Suzanne Waite, who did a great job of corralling all of our thoughts and debates into a paper, which is in front of you now. So you can scan there and have a read, which I would recommend that you do. So why did we do this paper? So, clearly, as we've just been discussing today already, there is a lot of work going on to measure sustainability impacts, and we're obviously seeing commitments across the sector from both healthcare, from industry, to reduce our environmental impacts. A number of companies now have net zero commitments, and as we've seen from the life cycle assessment work, a lot has been done to identify and understand our footprint much better as an industry. And equally, healthcare systems are trying to do the same thing, so trying to get to net zero. So obviously, we've got to a point together where we all need to work together to accurately measure the environmental impact. But then the next step, once we get some more of that data and once it starts to come through, we then need to think about how we use it, which is obviously the $1 million question. So really this paper is trying to recognise the fact that several HTA agencies are already exploring this and trying to build their expertise in this area of how you might use this information to inform decision making. So we thought putting out a discussion paper at this time was a useful contribution to the debate that's already happening. So the starting point really is when we think about the value proposition for healthcare for medicines. So clearly patients are at the centre of that value proposition, and how you know, making sure that clinical effectiveness and the impact on quality life is prioritised. But the broader elements of value that are looked at, obviously healthcare system, economic and societal, and now thinking about environment value, the value to the environment in that broader context is now part of that value discussion. So, sorry, let's get to the next slide. And where we really landed as a group, and this obviously comes through in a lot of the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition's work, is that we, from a measurement perspective, we really do need to look at it from a care pathway perspective. And clearly the product footprint has a really important role in helping companies understand the hotspots in their own supply chains to make improvements. But really, if we want to improve the sustainability of healthcare, we need to understand the broader context that that product goes into and how it modifies outcomes and impacts across the healthcare system. And I'm sure everyone on this call is quite familiar with this as a concept, but I think this diagram is quite helpful. So the blue box along the bottom are the elements involved in a life cycle assessment, which is obviously looking at the carbon footprint and the broader environmental impacts of the product or equipment or medical device. And obviously it's got the factors which David has helpfully talked us through today around raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, patient use and end of life. But really that then feeds into the diagram at the top, which is looking at the patient carbon footprint. And then this can put that intervention alongside the other important elements of care around monitoring, care management, diagnostics, and then hospital emissions. Because really the prize is if you can avoid emissions elsewhere in the healthcare systems. You know, we know that high impact parts, you know, hospitals, generally activity is generating environmental impact, whether that's from, you know, the heating, the electricity of those facilities, but also then the materials, the single-use plastics that are used in a day-to-day operations. So anything you can do to mitigate or reduce the impact in terms of hospital emissions generally has a broader environmental benefit. So it's really that concept that we think is really important to feed through into healthcare decision making. So then moving on to HTAs, and I suppose recognising that lots of experts are doing some great work, and really definitely listen in next week because we've got someone from HTAI but also from NICE presenting on really how they're trying to bring sustainability into their decisions. And obviously from a methodological perspective, there are different approaches that are being discussed. So I suppose as industry, we just wanted to recognise all of those debates happening and then sort of just bring our view to it, which is clearly that we need to make sure that we're flexible and that we sort of learn together, I think, through this approach so that we safeguard against any unintended consequences. Because we obviously, none of us want to see delays to treatment or interventions for patients. So it's how we kind of approach this in a very pragmatic way. And making sure that clearly all stakeholders are involved so that this really is kind of a system-wide response, and that, you know, we will need data collection efforts across different parts of the system, and we will need more people to understand what that data means. So I think we do all need a measured approach. So really we landed on some guiding principles, and this is obviously all open for discussion and debate, but you know, as I said, patient outcomes come first. That's one of the principles we wanted to see come through. As I've said, taking a care pathway approach to measurement, making sure that, yes, you need to understand the product or the intervention footprint, but actually what is the broader context and how does that modify emissions elsewhere in the healthcare system? Really will make sure it really drives the system change that we need. Protect innovation and patient access. As I said, that's really where, you know, we need the healthcare system to focus on what it needs to do. The most important things around patient access, and really then how environmental information can support that. And what we'll see, there have been various case studies, and I think there's some more later today, around actually if you do deliver high quality patient care, that generally does also reduce the environmental impact, because you are against unintended consequences in terms of patient management. As I've said already, taking a multi-stakeholder approach, and that's partly why we did this paper as part of the discussion and the voice, and we want obviously to be involved in those conversations, and then having open communication and transparency. So I think the final point I just wanted to leave this presentation on really was around building environmental literacy, because I think that this is a great topic, and it's really encouraging to hear all of the work of BSI and SMI. I think there's been a lot of very technical work in this space, which is great, and it really is helping us make sure we develop the right evidence and that we as practitioners understand that evidence. But I think the next step really will be, how do we translate that into a healthcare system where people are understandably focused on delivering excellent patient care, and this needs to support them. So making sure that we present the information in a way that is usable, understandable, and that it's not a complicating factor that people feel another burden to have to try to understand something new, but actually presenting it in a way that really is helpful, I think, to patient care. Because I think what we generally all understand is that there is an openness. People do want to see environmentally sustainable healthcare, and so the easier we can make that and the more understandable, the better. So I think I'll leave it on that. But yeah, as I said, so it's an invitation to carry on the discussion, and as I said, the webinar next week will get into it a bit more in terms of some of the methodologies and the technical experts, but I was just giving a bit of a high level overview of this paper. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. That's brilliant and extremely well described. And Matt Sawyer makes a really good point in the chat, which you might want to comment on, about the incredibly important role of prevention, because the best form of treatment is not to have treatment at all, in the sense that I think we'd all agree with that. And he highlights the recent work around modifiable risk factor. Any thoughts on that, Rachel? I know you've used Care Pathways approach to look at early intervention and prevention in your own work.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And I'm sorry I didn't mention prevention. No. I should have said that up front. Yeah, so we particularly looked at it in the role of obviously vaccines and preventing disease and the impact that has. So agree 100%. That is should be the initial focus of sustainable healthcare. Is how we can prevent and ensure that diseases don't happen in the first place. So yeah, completely agree.
Great, that's fantastic. And I think Carly and colleagues, the link to the webinar is in the chat, but we'll make sure that we feature that later in the day as well, so that we can catch up. Thank you very much, Rachel, and we look forward to hearing from you as well next week, because you're going to be giving your perspective. But great to hear that. And as you say, it's all about opening the conversation, and we're going to be doing a couple of webinars with Green and Healthy Hospitals Network with Healthcare Without Harm later in the year on decision making and the importance really of thinking about standards and metrics, as well as really practical examples of this in practice. So it's with that in mind, I'm very pleased to welcome Dara Archibald, who's Senior Consultant at ERM, and she's going to talk to us about an intriguing title, Evaluating the Environmental Impact of Care Pathways, a Promising Practice Study. So that sounds great, Dara. Very good to keep us guessing what it's going to be on. So we look forward to hearing.
Thanks, Fiona. So I've joined today as a follow-up from the last call about my research project that I'm conducting. So I was going to give a quick overview for people that I haven't presented to about my research project, but hopefully it follows on quite well from the previous presentation. So I am an MSc student at Imperial College London doing my MSc in health policy. And for my dissertation, I'm doing a research project on care pathways. So maybe just a little bit about me and why I think I'm doing this. So I'm a chemical engineer by background. I later joined the NHS General Management Scheme and ended up working at NHS England in the Medicines Net Zero team as a policy manager. I then joined ERM as to be a senior consultant in Michael Collins' team. But whilst I was at the NHS, I was doing my master's in health policy and I decided to continue that. So I self-funded my dissertation project. And my dissertation is on evaluating the environmental impact of care pathways. Evaluating the tool as a promising practice. So I'm focusing on NHS England with their net zero goals and the promising practice being care pathway assessments. But really the problem that I'm looking at is the challenge of quantifying healthcare emissions in a way that best supports decision making and enables resource efficient interventions. So my overarching question is, what are the opportunities and challenges of environmental care pathway assessments to evaluate and compare the impact of care pathways? Just as a bit of an overview of my study, I have done the study design now, got study approval through Imperial College London, but I am doing semi-structured interviews and a survey of anyone with experience with care pathways. And this work will then be analysed and ideally published to be able to support the NHS in understanding what care pathway assessments are and the use that they may be to them in being able to reach their net zero goals. The ask from today is, if you are able to please participate in an interview and the survey if you have any experience with care pathway assessments or assessing the environmental impact of healthcare. The study has been improved by Imperial College London, is completely self-funded, and any participation would be voluntary and anonymous. And these study findings will be shared with NHS England, the SHC and all SHC partners in late August to early September. The survey takes no more than 5 minutes and interviews would be about 30 to 40 minutes, but anything from the survey and the interviews is anonymised so that your identity remains confidential. But so it's just a really quick presentation to say thank you, and to ask if people do please engage in this work. I hope that it becomes very helpful for the NHS and directing this work about care pathways.
Brilliant, thanks very much. And do put the information in the chat as well if people want to find out more and engage. That would be great. And
thanks.
What do you kind of hope might be the outcome from this?
I think that it will offer a snapshot of where we are with care pathways currently and how they may be a useful tool to the NHS, and also bring together, from speaking to people that have varying opinions of what value care pathways bring as an assessment, and to be able to give a better view of that, a more holistic approach to that. Because I think people maybe in this group, they know a lot about care pathways, but whether people outside it really understand. So hopefully gives an approach to that. And I will distribute details. I think SHC's kindly offered to distribute some of those details after the meeting. So thank you very much for having me. I think maybe there was a question in the chat, sorry, but I wasn't sure if that was at me.
I think it was, yeah. From Kelly, are you considering biodiversity impacts as part of this?
So the main focus is about the climate change impact and the net zero goal of the NHS, but I think one of the discussions around care pathway assessments is how they can be adapted, similar to how like an LCA methodology can look at various impacts. Yeah.
And that makes the really important point that so much of patient contact is actually in primary care and often doesn't get captured fully in care pathway work. Are you planning to interview a few people in that? And Matt, I'm assuming that you're offering.
Yes. So interviewing experience with care or looking at the environmental impact of care pathways, ideally across all aspects of care. So, and people with a variety of experience, so people that may have done the modelling about it or may have read a care pathway assessment and then made decisions in healthcare as a part of that, or be influenced in their decisions by it.
Yeah, so Matt has definitely volunteered. So if you put your details in, he has a fantastic understanding of primary care and sustainability. So I'm sure can also point you in the direction of other people as well. And Kelly said she asked a question about biodiversity diversity, because a lot of people are basically approaching her now to ask about this, and I think I'm finding that too, because I think for many of us, our motivation for all of this work started with nature and the fantastic impact it has on our own health and well-being.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to think of it as a more holistic approach, and I think that's partly what Care Pathways offer in terms of like not just like a product LCA of a medicine, but looking at it more broadly.
Yeah, great. So Matt's given you his details, so you've got one instant recruit. That's great, and we're delighted to be able to highlight your work, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
I look forward to hearing more about the outcomes, and then thinking about how we can work with everybody to really make the most of what you find. So thanks so much. So we conclude our part of the agenda where we're looking at metrics and decision making with some of our own work, and our very own Keith Moore, who is what did you describe yourself as? Sustainable Healthcare Coalition Dogs Body yesterday. Yeah, absolutely. But he's actually our program coordinator, but it underpins a lot of what we do and is a fantastic champion for all our work. And he's going to talk about something that, as Jose said, is very complementary to the SMI work in LCA, about how we measure the impact of clinical trials, and really just to get you up to speed. We've talked about this in a number of sessions, so it's really to tell you what's going on now and just to let you know what happened earlier in the year since our last engagement meeting.
Thank you.
And you're not in presentation mode at the moment, Keith.
No, I know. There we go.
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. Yes. Highly relevant. Slight step sideways from the discussions that we've been having so far about LCA and technology assessments and care pathways. We haven't focused very much on care pathways here, but what we are going to focus on is the bit in red, the R&D burden, which is estimated to be around 5% of health system impacts. The LCA work that Courtney and Jose were talking about, you could put into the supply chain bit. The care pathways, a little covered by that LCA, particularly in the patient use of products. But it's also true that most of the clinical research that's done, clinical trials that's done, is done in hospital settings. And it is a large footprint and needs addressing if you're going to get the whole system to move towards net zero. So we've been applying our thinking through a consortium, because everything is done better when it's done collectively. And I've put the UK Health Alliance on Climate Change's logo to the top left of this slide, because spookily, it's exactly 5 years. It's April 2020 that we started to have conversations with them, and Richard Smith will be talking to us later on a different issue. But he started to talk to Fiona about, is any about clinical trials, and have you got any thoughts about how you might go about measuring and then reducing these impacts? I'll tell you a little bit about the Trials Methodology Research Partnership and the work that Paula and Lisa and Jess have been doing there with us. But I'm going to focus most of this conversation on what we've been doing to broaden from academic specific methodology into methodology that's hopefully applicable to academic and commercial trials. And the consortium that we've has got three main focuses. There's the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition itself and our membership, overlapping very heavily with membership of the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and we've heard a lot about them through Jose. But also the Pistoia Alliance, who's come on board with us, and that's really important because that brings not just the sponsor, innovative pharma companies, but also their supply chain through the contract research organisations. And what have we done? The whole premise of the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition from its its inception, when the predecessor to the Greener NHS team set us up, was that you manage best what you can understand through measurement. So we did in the early days set up a standard with a tick from the greenhouse gas protocol to look at measure the footprint of pharmaceuticals and medical devices. We moved on from there to an understanding that just having a product footprint assessed doesn't tell you how that is expressed and what the impacts of that product are going to be as it goes through a care setting. So we then went on to build care pathway methodology guidance, and to try and learn if this is applicable and appropriate and value adding through doing case studies. It absolutely is. Every time we've done one, it's shown that if you put a patient-centric, clinical outcome-centric focus on designing care pathways and products, and they're done properly and effectively and efficiently, then you will also gain sustainability benefits from that, because you're providing a better quality and more effective health intervention. We've now applied that same thinking to designing a framework for measuring the impacts of clinical trials. And the only the first thing to say is that the underlying principle of all this is common to just about every form of LCA activity. It's an activity-based approach that we advocate rather than a input-output approach, because everyone knows that the costs of the steps in any chain like this are not particularly indicative, or cannot automatically be indicative of what the CO2 or environmental burdens are. So we've moved down the route of an activity-based approach. Each activity is given a carbon emission factor, and you add up the number of incidents of whatever that particular activity is, be it patient travel or visits or the interventional product itself. Add all those together, multiply them by their emission factors, and you end up with a Lego brick house that tells you the overall picture of your trial. It's very, very simple philosophically, rather difficult to do in practice because of the number of line items that you have to go through to build a complete picture of your activity, in this case, clinical trials. Over this last 5 years, we have done well. We have built a method, and the method tells you what to do to incorporate a footprint, an LCA effectively, of a clinical trial for any environmental sustainability aspect. We've then applied that through an assessment guidance document to the one thing that seems to focus people's minds on any environmental issue, which is carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. So the first document tells you, the second one tells you how to apply that in getting a carbon footprint out. And then we've gone beyond that. At the end of last year, we produced a carbon calculator so that people can do an assessment, even if they don't know much at all about life cycle assessment methodologies or carbon footprinting methodologies. The calculator will do it for them. Key to the ability to deliver that has been data, and we've spent really the last couple of years building a database to put behind the calculator and to put behind the guidance and the method as well, so that people will be able to have access to appropriate emission factors for things like participant travel and monitoring visits and what have you. What this does in the whole is give you a whole bunch of lovely pie charts that tell you where your emissions are in your trial, either by geography or by activity. And that is great, but is only the start, because it's only then that the real work starts in trying to understand how you can reduce those emissions and decarbonise that trial footprint. All of these resources are freely available. The coalition, across the SMI, across the academics, across the Pistorial Alliance, and across ourselves, want this to be available to help people understand their own trials and what their own decarbonisation opportunities are, but also to engage in the conversation with us. So we've built a knowledge hub on our SHC website. We've got the calculator is available from there. The knowledge hub hopefully will be building a suite of case studies, implementation studies, things like that, that we can help people really get under the skin of what this means and how to apply these this framework, these tools, methods and things that we've developed. Had a little bit of interaction with the with Paula, who leads with Lisa on the Academic Trials Partnership. Their work has really focused on making sure that everything that comes out of this coalition and everything that they do is absolutely applicable for the setting of academic trials. We recognise that an academic trial and a commercial trial are very similar beasts. They do the same thing, using participants and investigational products and all the rest of it, but just the setting, the language, and the way these studies are organised and managed may be slightly different. So it's absolutely key that whatever we produce, whatever is produced, is of value and appropriate to the audience it's intended for. And Paula, Lisa and Jess have done a fantastic job of again making sure that all this is open access through the BMJ Open. They've published the methodology, the guidance and some case studies, and since then they've gone through footprinting another 10 trials. So altogether 12 trials have been not just footprinted but published to make sure that this is a truly open and advancing conversation for us. And I'm sure Paula, Lisa or Jess can jump in the conversation as we take this forward. I'd like to go back though to the Sustainable Markets Initiative. As Jose said, it's a CEO level driven partnership across the healthcare ecosystem, principally of pharma organisations leading the way. It sits under the Terra Carta banner set up by the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles III. And it sits there as a health system task force, one of around 20 odd task forces, including sustainable banking and aviation and all sorts of other task forces. The 4 key areas of focus that's been through is around managing supply chains and making those sustainable. The patient care pathways work, we've already heard from Jose and Courtney about the LCA developments going on there, and from Rachel on how to think about how you can incorporate the idea of care pathways into health technology assessment. We, in the clinical trials area, sit under the digital healthcare banner. And it's really important to say that this is not just an academic exercise to bring forward methodologies and tools, but it is a commitment from these companies to use this to, first of all, measure and report on their clinical trial emissions. And for trials starting from January this year, they're starting to gather that data. Obviously, there's not going to be much to report on until those trials are starting to come towards their end and they've actually got a footprint of activity to report. But really importantly, to start to use this understanding of trials to start to set emission reduction targets. And the 4th tick down the bottom left there is about incentivizing CROs and suppliers to work with them, to partner, to take up their own similar commitments to clinical trial decarbonisation. And the picture on the letter, open letter from the 7 CEOs of the companies around the table with us, to invite those CROs to come on board and to work with them to help, partly because the CROs are involved in doing a lot of the activity. So we need to understand, the companies need to understand what the activities that the CROs are doing for them contribute to the footprint, and partly to get them to move towards their own decarbonisation journey. I'll put a plug, as several speakers have done already today. It's great to have all these resources available, but what's really important is the conversations that go around those resources. So we're starting up a community of practice. It's going to be hosted on LinkedIn. And another webinar to put in your diaries, there'll be a launch webinar for this community of practice on Thursday, the 5th of June. And the QR codes there and links are available, and we'll stick them in the chat as well as we go forward. And that's all I think I need to say at this moment. So thank you, Fiona.
Thanks very much, Keith. And we're looking forward to sharing more details about the tool, to go into more depth in the community of practice, and also look for opportunities to learn from people in the broader community around what they're doing. Because as Keith said, the object of the exercise isn't measurement, it's actually decarbonising clinical trials. And thanks to Paula and Jess, who I know are on the call, and thanks for putting the papers and references in the chat as well, Paula. Are there any questions or points anybody wants to raise for Keith? If not, I think that brings our session on metrics for decision making to a very successful close. We started thinking about, how do you shape the system through standards, how we can develop that, and Courtney demonstrated not only how you develop a standard, but how once you have a standard, it can then drive change in the bigger system. Jose focused very much on that challenge of the how you really use that approach of developing a method to bring together quite a large collaboration. We heard from Rachel about the importance then of really thinking about environment as part of health technology assessment, how we want to have an open conversation. And yes, there's been another plug for our webinar next week on that, where really we'll be hearing from colleagues at NICE and Health Technology Assessment International as well. And then Dara, with her own research, to think about, well, how can we learn from measuring the impact in care pathways, and what does that research mean for what we need to do next? And then finally, Keith finished with our own work on how you assess clinical trials. But as we heard, we've got a very broad collaboration with academic colleagues, with colleagues in industry in Boehringer Ingelheim and Johnson & Johnson, who are on the call as well as the Sustainable Markets Initiative. But the key thing, I think, the reason why the SMI is powerful is because of the M. It's the markets, it's how do we shape the system. And metrics are a really good way of driving change, allowing you to analyse the problem, but then of course improve it. So thank you very much for joining us for the first session. We now have a well-earned coffee break for you all.